Look, another one of your key aims here is, of course, to have net zero emissions by 2030. It's only 8 years away, so not a great deal of time on the board. I think it's a very noble goal, but I do have some concerns about it. I mean, you look at BMW, for example. They've made a pledge to have EVs accounting for 50% of their production by 2030. I think that's quite realistic, but how can you possibly achieve that target of zero emissions for this country by 2030 without having some sort of dire ramifications for cost of living expenses or taxation issues, and ultimately I feel penalising the GDP of the country, given we are so focused on mining?
Yeah, well, this is the thing that it gets back to what we were talking about before with the job guarantee. If you see, so let's say we've got a policy, we want to build electric vehicles. Now, you know, getting to net zero emissions by 2030 involves 1,000 factors, but let's just take one at random. We want to build electric vehicles, and we want to get to 100% use of electric vehicles, be it from local production or by subsidising the import foreign or whatever we do, giving people tax breaks or whatever to buy them, all those sort of things. Now, if you see the government's investment in creating a power plant and using the plants in Adelaide and employing people and getting parts and so on, if you see all that as a cost to the community, then it looks like we're all going to get punished. If you see that as an investment, where whatever you do in that regard, as I said before, puts money in the pockets of the entrepreneurs and the workers and the investors and everything, and that gets spent and re-spent across the economy, then at the end of the day, the GDP goes up because you've stimulated the economy and you've solved the problem of electric vehicles. But I think I have this tendency to go to, you know, we're doing all these debates at the moment around the North Sydney electorate, and, you know, we have usually 2 to 3 minutes to talk about our policy. We don't have the luxury of the sort of what we're doing here today. And so I've taken to carrying around our 70-page hard copy of our 70-page policy and waving at the audience and saying, listen, this was written by Dr. Phil Schmidt, former chief scientist at the CSIRO, and his colleague, Dr. Jeff Gill, and Professor Stephen Kline, a world-leading economist. And they show in these 70 pages why we are in a climate emergency, why, therefore, we must go for net zero emissions by 2030, and how we will do that both from a technical and an economic point of view. And I do that because to try and get into the detail and summarise the detail in 3 minutes, or even you know, we probably have a few more minutes, it's impossible. But I guess the bottom line is this: it's a war. You know, it's a war we're fighting for the very existence of our planet. And if we believe that we are in a climate emergency, it's not a question of how we do it, but how can we afford not to do it? So we would throw everything at it. And as I say, that doesn't mean that we would be costing the people money or causing the people pain. We would be stimulating the economy at the same time, but we would throw everything at it. When you are in a dire situation, that's assuming you accept that it's a climate emergency. If you don't, then then what we're doing is silly. But if you accept it's a climate emergency, you've got to throw everything at it. I say, you know, it's like when Churchill was sitting in his office and Hitler was on the other side of the channel, and he made that famous speech. It'd be like him saying, well, you know, we might fight them on the beaches if the economic indicators are right, you know, so on and so forth. Like, he went, we will fight them on the beach, we'll fight them on the streets. And he didn't even know, I mean, we've got a plan, but I mean, he didn't even know what he was going to do at that stage. He just knew that he had to do whatever was necessary, because the fate of his country and their way of life was in the balance. The fate of our very planet and our existence is in the balance. So when people talk about, you know, oh, we can wait for 2040 or 2050, I mean, we say we won't be here then.
Yeah, no, I think, look, it's definitely something that is impacting us, and we can see it in real time. So to have a plan and enact it nice and quick is obviously the way forward. I don't think anyone is going to be disagreeing with that concept, that's for sure. Now, another core pledge of the New Liberals is protecting the ABC, and I suppose many would argue that new media and alternative avenues is probably the way forward, moving forward. I mean, here we are able to have this long-form chat right now, for example, and I think there's also a bit of criticism about the ABC that ultimately they've failed to I suppose, adequately represent all sides of politics, and you know, there's a lot of people there that are on quite large money that are probably not seeing what they would like to for their communities, for example. So I guess the question would be, why such a focus on protecting the ABC, and how would you like to see them, I suppose, either alter, or what does the future look like for the ABC for you?
Yeah. Sure. I mean, what you make, you know, many really good points there. And I think that maybe we need to spell out a little more than we have in our policies, given what you've just said, that we wouldn't be restricting the ABC to traditional forms of broadcast, you know. What we would be trying to do is create a national purveyor of our culture, if you like. The very best documentaries, interviews, dramas in the world that could show people what we're like. Now, if the best way to do that was through alternative platforms or social media, or certainly streaming, I mean, live television, sure, it's had its day, you know, streaming, you would want the ABC, that would be its masthead. I guess what's happened to the ABC is that it's been set upon by all sides of politics, so they've become timid, and that timidity can often be read as not properly putting the case for all sides of politics. I think if you see, we would like in an ideal situation to guarantee the ABC's funding as part of our Bill of Rights that would be entrenched in the Constitution. Now, it's an unusual thing to put in a Bill of Rights, but if you have a national voice and a national broadcaster, and they're not worried about what they say because they're not worried that they're going to lose their jobs, they're not worried that they're going to be defunded and so on, then I think you'll return to the bold ABC that you still see flashes of with things like Four Corners, you know. But I agree with you. They're not what they were. Is that their fault, or is that the fault of governments that defund and, you know, arrest their journalists and you know, all that sort of thing? And I think we would, but you know, I guess the ABC as such is not important. What is important is to have some sort of national arm that is removed from the day-to-day pressures of politics, so that they can be objective, and so they can produce and properly fund them and guarantee that funding so they can produce high quality stuff. Now, that's not to say that we wouldn't be looking to fund all sorts of other media outlets as well. I mean, we had a policy, for example, in our media policy to bring back local papers to the country areas, because you remember when Murdoch just closed them all down because he owned most of them. Suddenly, country towns didn't have a local paper, and in a place like a country town, it's really, really an important medium. It doesn't have to come back as a hard copy version; it can be an online version or whatever it needs to be. But I think the ABC is part of a broader plan. We often say that, you know, the American empire, if you want to call it that, wasn't about battleships and guns. It was about Hollywood. You know, it was about propagating the American ideals and the way of life around the world. And I think it made them strong, and I think it would make us strong, and it would give us confidence. But it doesn't have to be the ABC per se.
Well, Victor, one thing you mentioned there was, you know, the potential of journalists being arrested, for example. We saw a bunch of crazy stuff over the past 2 years. Real Ruction down there in Melbourne, for example, he was being hassled quite a bit from AFP forces during all the lockdowns that were going on there. He's an independent journalist, for example, so that was pretty crazy scenes. We've seen Friendly Geordies, who's typically more of a comedian, had that big stoush with, I think it was Barnaby Joyce. So I guess that raises another important question then. One thing that has really impacted society, especially here in Australia the last few years, would be, I suppose, freedom of speech and PC culture. Now, where do you lie and the New Liberals lie with all that debate at the moment?
With freedom of speech?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's a big one. If you're talking about, are you talking about the religious freedom bill?
I suppose more just the ability to risk being offensive, essentially. So being able to speak your mind, say what there is without recourse and fear of cancel culture.
No, I've got you. No, I think there's the defamation laws. This is not official policy. This is just me talking as me, because it's really a state issue and we're only a federal party. But I think the defamation laws need to be reformed because they heavily favour politicians over those who are trying to broadcast, an alternative opinion. I think the Friendly Geordies one was with Barilaro, wasn't it? Actually,
yes, John Barilaro.
And that's right, and that's a really good example of how a young, dynamic journalist who really wants to take a few pot shots is battered back into submission by a politician who's going to have way more money than him, and who may even find ways, I don't know, but may even find ways to utilise the public purse. And I think they need to be reformed to give the media. And the other example, it's not just the media. That poor guy on Twitter who Peter Dutton sued for something, and he had to do a GoFundMe to defend himself. What they are doing is they're using the defamation laws to silence their critics. That has to be reformed. I mean, personally, I would go so far, perhaps, as to say, if you choose to take public office, you should choose to take whatever criticism in whatever form it comes. I would, and this is a bit extreme, I do agree, and there would probably need to be some carefully thought out exceptions. But I think I would have a politician not being able to sue a general member of the public for what they said about them through the defamation laws, because it's a one-sided thing that, and now with social media, of course, many of the commentators are small individuals, and they're just not going to have anything like the pocket depth of these politicians.
Now, Victor, obviously we've covered some pretty broad issues, and if you were to win election, your role would primarily be in Canberra. But what do you think you bring to the table for North Sydney that your opposition does not? Obviously, you need to be a voice for that region as well.
I think we have a couple of policies that specifically relate to North Sydney. Like we have we're very worried about a Northern Beaches tunnel that's being developed here. I would want to put pressure on the government to remove the federal funding for that so that it didn't happen. I made the point in a speech the other day that it's getting in the length of the tunnel that goes from our electorate to the next electorate, which is 8 kilometres. It's $1 billion per kilometre, so it's $8 billion, and this is a tunnel that has smokestacks that throw rubbish all over primary school. They're right next to primary school. It's terrible. But just on the funding, I said, well, history has shown that building more roads and bridges and tunnels doesn't solve anything, because it just encourages people to put more cars on the road. I remember back in the 60s when they opened the great new Gladesville Bridge, 4 lanes instead of 1. They had a traffic jam on the first day because everybody went, wacko, we can take our car, And I made the point that an electric bus costs $800,000, which means for the same $8 billion, you could buy 10,000 electric buses, which means the people coming from the northern beaches of Sydney into the city would walk out of their house and there'd be a bus every 30 seconds and there wouldn't need to be a car on the road. Now, that's the way to go. Now, that's something specifically for North Sydney. I also have plans for, enacting a pilot scheme for our education policy within the North Sydney electorate, which is an electorate which is, despite its prosperity, very poorly served by public education, and 70% of people here or more send their kids to public schools. So there's a lot of more localised issues that we talk about here out on the hustings and so on. But I think the bottom line is that I would be available to the local community, because I actually like talking to people and I like solving their problems. I was the founder and director of the Refugee Law Project, and that brings me great joy, you know. And I think, with all due respect to the incumbent Liberal, up to this point, North Sydney's been a seat where you really didn't have to do anything for anybody because it was a gift from the party. If you got given North Sydney, well, you could go back to bed, you know. That's probably terribly unfair to one of my opponents, but I think there is, unfortunately, a lot of truth in that. And so I'd just be bringing, like, a real person who lived there and cared about the place, you know, fundamentals like that.
Well, Victor, it's been great to chat with you. Just before we do wrap things up, any final words you'd like to share with our audience?
I guess I just want to say, and I may have mentioned this earlier in our conversation, that we at the bottom of all this is that desire that we have on all our literature where we say we're fighting for compassion, justice, and integrity. We want to bring those things that matter back to the centre of political life. So that, I mean, I think for me personally, one of the very low moments in politics over the last 20 years was when somebody suggested to Josh Frydenberg that the annual budget should take into account the welfare of the people, and he laughed in Parliament, you know, and I thought, well, that's right. That really sums it up. We have 3.2 million below the poverty line. We have hundreds of thousands of children sleeping on the streets. We have people being unable to afford their housing, unable to afford their rent, struggling in a gig economy at 4 jobs. We have refugees thrown permanently into dungeons for the rest of their life for doing nothing more than raising their hand. You know, compassion, justice, integrity, they've absolutely gone out the window. And we test all our policies against those things. Is this policy compassionate? Does it bring justice? Does it highlight integrity? And also, you know, is there equality of opportunity involved in this? Because unless you give equality of opportunity, there is no compassion, you can't be just, and there's no integrity involved. So that's what we want to bring back, those unfashionable terms that people don't like to talk about, and in politics, and people like Frydenberg like to laugh about. Hopefully he won't be laughing for much longer. I don't know. Anyway, that would be the key message that I would like to leave your viewers with.
Well, Victor, it's a lot more eloquent than if you want to go, you'll get a go. I can tell you that much. So well done for working that there for us. And look, I must say, coming into this interview, I didn't know a great deal about what you were doing with the New Liberals, but you fleshed it out quite nicely, and I think there's some really good stuff in there. So best of luck for the campaign, and hopefully we can see you shaking things up a little bit as part of that. I think there's a new surge of independent movement coming, so absolutely, maybe you can take advantage of that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on and for your time, James.
Well, Victor, thank you very much. That is Victor Kline, leader of the New Liberals Party and candidate for North Sydney on Kalkine TV as part of our 2022 election coverage. Make sure that you subscribe, as we do have a vast array of politicians appearing on the channel over the coming weeks. And until next time, make sure to keep it locked here on Kalkine TV.